Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Mere days ago, all our lives changed forever when the definitive and objective tier rankings of all the racial options in D&D was completed at last. Occasionally someone comes along and says this isn't an objective list. They say it's subjective. This is easy to debunk. Merely look at all the comments about the videos being objectionable. They don't call it subjectable, do they? Check and mate. It's been a life changer for me as well. Each time I leave my home, I'm mobbed by patrons sobbing in joy at how having access to these videos early saved jobs, marriages, and even their lives. Patreon link as always in the video description, because who knows when the next world-changing series will be released early on Patreon. I mean, maybe it's already there. And maybe it's not. I guess you'll never know. However, as I mentioned in my last video, viewers have been begging me for more. Please, Chris, please. I need to know the tier rankings of the Dragonmarked Races in Eberron. Please, Chris. I play with legacy content, and I can't go on without knowing where the Volo's version of the Kobold ranks. My partner and I keep fighting, and only you telling us where their ranking is will save our relationship. Let it not be said that I won't make this sacrifice of another video in this series to help others. My altruism knows no bounds. Today we go on a journey like never before. So let's begin. Once again, here's the tier ranking chart, and as previously implied, it's absolutely perfect. It's also pretty cramped, so I'm not filling it out with multiple kobolds and multiple hobgoblins, but I will show you exactly, with no errors, where each of these racial options would have placed on this chart. This is my What If tier ranking video. We start our journey with a trip to Eberron, and I'm going to get a bit more serious here. Dragon marks are options for your Eberron character, creating new subraces or variant races for most of the player's handbook stuff. For humans and half-orcs, these are treated as variant races, replacing all their racial features. For half-elves, they get to keep some of their features, but others get replaced. And for dwarves, elves, gnomes, and halflings, these are basically new subraces. The most notable feature for any Dragonmarked character is the Spells of the Mark. This is a feature that can be exceedingly valuable or completely worthless, depending on your character build. Entire builds can be based around this feature, while in other cases, it's a throwaway. Here's how Spells of the Mark works, and all Dragonmarked races have some version of this. If your character is a spellcaster, the spells on these lists are added to the spell list of your spellcasting class. If you aren't a spellcaster, well, get stuffed. My original plan was to assign a point total to each spell on the Spells of the Mark list, and then add those totals together, keeping in mind that not all characters benefited from this feature at all, and certainly any character without full spellcasting progression benefited less than one with it. And those results ended up being so wacky that I decided that wasn't the way to go. So instead I came up with a more general point system. If the spells on the list are basically situational or common or non-character defining, I'm going to assign the entire feature between 15 and 25 points. I'm calling a list like this a standard list. If there's even one spell on the list that would have me choose this Dragonmark specifically to make a character around that option, then it's between 40 and 60 points. I'm calling that kind of list an exceptional list. So that out of the way, we begin with a variant half-elf Mark of Detection. So with half-elves, they keep some of their features and others are replaced. So the base half-elf gets 50 points, 24 enhanced ability scores, 10 for Fey Ancestry, 10 for Dark Vision, and 10 for Skill Versatility. The Mark of Detection half-elf loses their enhanced ability scores, getting a +3 like most races do, so they lose 20 points. They also lose Skill Versatility, so that's another -10, so they're sitting at a base 20 points before we get started. Then Deductive Intuition, and this is a feature we'll see various iterations of across this list. In each case, providing a D4 bonus to certain skill or tool checks. In this case, it's to all Intelligence Investigation and Wisdom Insight checks. These are both pretty common skills. This feature is actually pretty similar to the Vidalcan feature Tireless Precision, and the bonus D4 portion of that feature I assigned 5 points. In this case, I think it's fairly evenly valuable, so 5 points. Then Magical Detection gives Mark of Detection 3 free spell castings. Detect Magic and Detect Poison and Disease at first level, and then See Invisibility at level 3. These are once per long rest castings without the ability to cast them again with spell slots. They also don't allow you to choose your casting ability modifier, though for these spells that doesn't really matter. These are all really situational. I figure 3 points for Detect Magic. Remember, that has the ritual tag, so although it's a good spell, there is a good chance that someone in your party can cast it for free anyways if they have 10 minutes. Then 2 for Detect Poison and Disease, and 7 for See Invisibility for a total of 12 points. Then we have Spells of the Mark, and I think these are all pretty obviously non-character defining spells. There are some decent spells on this list though. Detect Thoughts is pretty good, Arcane Eye is a good spell, Divination is a good spell, but there's some garbage here too. This is a standard list, I'm assigning 18 points. So the base half-elf is 50, minus 20 for losing exceptional ability scores, minus 10 for losing skill versatility, 5 points for deductive intuition, 12 points for magical detection, 18 points for spells of the mark, and the variant half-elf Mark of Detection totals 55 points. And it would have landed in C tier, tied with the Hill Dwarf and the Kalashtar. Next is the variant half-orc or human Mark of Finding. So although these are different races, they have identical features because all previous features are removed. So we'll score them together, they'll get exactly the same score. The ability score increase is standard, 0 points. Dark Vision 60 feet is a standard range, that's 10 points. Hunter's Intuition, so a D4 to Wisdom Perception or Wisdom Survival skill checks. This one is pretty desirable. Though note a bonus D4 isn't improving your passive perception, still I'm going to give this a few bonus points and we'll make it 8 points. Then Finder's Magic. So the same thing about spell slots and ability scores, but Hunter's Mark is available at level 1 for 5 points and Locate Object at level 3 for 10 more points, so that's 15 points total. Then Spells of the Mark. This is again a standard list. Nothing you're basing a whole character around, though I like those first level spells. Locate Object is good, but you can already cast it once for free, and I do question how many times you cast Locate Object in one day. Divination and Communion with Nature are nice rituals, and if you have ritual casting with your base class, you should be able to cast any of these spells with the ritual tag ritually as well. So I'm going to give this 21 points. Dark Vision is worth 10, Hunter's Intuition is worth 8, Finder's Magic 15, and Spells of the Mark 21, and the Mark of Finding Human and Half-Orc score 54 points. That would have put them in C tier, tied with the Half-Orc and the Lokatha. Seriously though, if you wanted to make a divination-focused character, this would be a really good option. Variant Human, Mark of Handling. So again, this doesn't build on the base human features, this is a replacement. So the ability score bonus is the standard for 0 points. Wild Intuition is the D4 for Wisdom, Animal Handling, and Intelligence Nature. And there's obviously a theme here, and it's worth 5 points. Then Primal Connection, Animal Friendship, and Speak with Animals once per day. Now for the right setting, this could be great, but in general I think it is a little specific. I'm going to give them 3 and 5 points respectively for 8 points. Then this one is interesting. The bigger they are. This allows you to use Animal Friendship or Speak with Animals on monstrosities as long as their intelligence score is 3 or lower. That's actually pretty bonkers. I mean, beasts top out at CR 8. I think there's like one higher in Descent to Avernus, but in any of the main books, CR 8 for the T-Rex is the top of the list. Monstrosities aren't like that at all. This allows you to cast Animal Friendship on a purple worm. That's crazy. I mean, even a Tarrasque. Though you deal with legendary resistances in that case, but still, I'm going to give this 20 points. Then Spells of the Mark. This is one of those character-defining lists, or an exceptional list, and it's all about conjure animals. If you are playing a cleric, a bard, a wizard, a sorcerer, or a warlock, this is a spell that you can literally base an optimized build around. Though I don't think any of them would match Shepherd Druid for optimizing this spell, so I'm going to go on the lower end, 40 points. So ability scores 0, Wild Intuition 5, Primal Connection 8, the bigger they are 20, and spells with the mark 40, and the variant human mark of handling totals 73 points. So the variant human mark of handling would have been right here at the end of A tier behind the Sea Elf. Halfling subrace, mark of healing. So with halflings, the Dragonmark counts as a subrace, so they still have the minus 20 for the 25-foot movement speed, 50 for luck, 10 for brave, and 10 for halfling nimbleness for a total of 50 before adding the subrace. Medical intuition gives you the D4 bonus to wisdom medicine checks or an ability check using our herbalism kit. I'll say 3 points. Then healing touch provides cure wounds at first level and lesser restoration at third level. Here the limit to the casting ability makes a difference for cure wounds, so I'll say 7 points, and not for lesser restoration, which I'm giving 10 points, for a total of 17 points for healing touch. Then spells. Nothing here is character defining, but if you are playing a caster without access to healing spells, then spells like Healing Word or Aura Vitality, even Greater Restoration, are all pretty notable. Still, this is a standard list. I'm going to give it 22 points. So the base halfling gets us 50, 3 for medical intuition, 17 for healing touch, and mark of healing for 22, and the mark of healing halfling totals 92 points. That puts it at the top of A tier, tied with the plasmoid. We get one other halfling subrace, that's the mark of hospitality. Ever hospitable is a D4 to charisma persuasion checks, and that's okay, or ability checks involving brewer supplies or cook's utensils. So some big stakes stuff there. I'm going to give the whole thing 5 points. Then Innkeeper's Magic. The Prestidigitation cantrip is okay, it's worth 5. Purify Food and Drink doesn't come up very much. I'm going to give it 2. An Unseen Servant is a ritual. I'm going to give it 3. That's 10 points total. Spells of the Mark is a standard list. Some good spells on this list are Goodberry, Aid, and Lehman's Hut, but there's nothing here character defining. I'm going to give it 20 points. So it's 50 for the base halfling, Ever Hospitable for 5 more, Innkeeper's Magic for 10, and Spells of the Mark 20, and the Mark of Hospitality halfling totals 85 points, and that would have had them in A tier, tied with the Triton. Then we have Variant Human, Mark of Making. So again, this is a total replacement for the features that humans normally get. Ability scores are standard for 0 points. Artisan's Intuition provides a D4 for Arcana or Artisan's Tools checks. This is pretty niche. I'm going to give it 4 points. Maker's Gift is a tool proficiency. That's worth 1. Spellsmith provides the Mending cantrip. That's middle of the road. I'm going to give it 5. And then the Magic Weapon spell. So this is a second level spell that you're going to be able to cast when you're level 1. But also, it doesn't require concentration when you use it this way. That is pretty unique and pretty good. So I'm adding 25 more points for a total of 30. It's one of those things that's going to be fantastic at low levels and pretty so-so at high levels once magic weapons are kind of a regular thing. Then Spells of the Mark. This is a standard list and it is also on the weaker side. I should also note that this has magic weapon on it, but if you cast it with your spell slots, then you don't have the enhancement where there's no concentration. This is a 15-point list. So Artisan's Intuition is worth 4, Maker's Gift is worth 1, Spellsmith is 30, Spells of the Mark 15, and the Variant Human Mark of Making totals 50 points. And that lands it near the bottom of C tier. Basically, it's tied with the last 3 races on this list. Then, Variant Human Mark of Passage. So, ability score increase is standard, 0 points. Courier Speed is a base walking speed of 35, 20 points. Intuitive Motion is a D4 to Dexterity Acrobatics or Land Vehicles checks. That's 4 points. Magical Passage is Misty Step once per long rest. I've already got a value for this because it's the same as the Eladrin in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I gave that 30 points, so it gets 30 points here. Spells of the Mark. Now this is a great list. We have Pass Without Trace, Phantom Steed, Dimension Door. Do I build my entire character around this list? No. But it is a top-end standard list. 25 points. And so we have Ability Score 0, Courier Speed 20, Intuitive Motion 4, Magical Passage 30, and Spells of the Mark 25, and the Variant Human Mark of Passage adds up to 79 points. That's A tier and tied with the Satyr. Gnome Subrace, Mark of Scribing. So this is our first Gnomish subrace, and the base gnome has Dark Vision for 10, Speed minus 20, and Gnome Cunning 25 for a base score of 15. Gifted Scribe is a D4 to Intelligence History, and Calligrapher's Supplies. I'm going to give this 4 points. Scribe's Insight includes the message cantrip, that's 4. Comprehend Languages, that's 5. And at 3rd level, Magic Mouth, 5 more. Magic Mouth could be worth more if you're using like some special tech you can do with Magic Mouth. I'm going to assume that we're playing at a standard table, and it's 5 points. So 14 points total for this feature. Then Spells of the Mark. This is a standard list. There are some decent spells here, like Silence and Arcane Eye, and there are some stinkers. This is worth 18 points. And so that's 15 for the base Gnome, Gifted Scribe for 4 more, Scribe's Insight is worth 14, and Spells of the Mark is worth 18, and the Mark of Scribing Gnome totals up to 51 points. And they would have been on C tier, tied with the Hadozi. Variant Human, Mark of the Sentinel. So we're going to have standard ability scores worth 0. Sentinel's Intuition provides a D4 bonus to Wisdom Insight and Wisdom Perception checks. That's really nice because these are both wisdom-based checks and common skills. I'm going to give this 8 points. Then Guardian's Shield. You get the shield spell once per long rest. Now, if you could use spell slots to cast this again, this would be worth a lot. You can't. It gets 15 points. Vigilant Guardian. This is a pretty cool feature. If a creature you can see within 5 feet of you is hit by an attack roll, you can use your reaction to swap places with that creature and are hit by the attack instead. Unfortunately, this is a once per long rest feature, so really it's just a ribbon, 8 points. Spells of the Mark. So this is an exceptional list. Giving clerics, bards, and druids counterspell on their list is a character-defining feature. Bigby's Hand might arguably be a character-defining feature as well. This is going to get 47 points. So ability score 0, Sentinel's Intuition 8, Guardian's Shield 15, Vigilant Guardian 8, and Spells of the Mark 47, and the Variant Human Mark of the Sentinel totals 78 points. That would have put it in A tier between the Stout Halfling and the Satyr. Listen, it depends on what you're making. For a wizard, this is probably C or D tier, but for a cleric, it's probably S tier. Elf Subrace, Mark of Shadow. So we go to the base elf and we have a Dark Vision for 10, Keen Senses for 4, Fey Ancestry for 10, and Trance for 10, so the base elf is worth 34 points. Then Cunning Intuition is a D4 for a Charisma Performance and Dexterity Stealth checks. I mean, I'll take a D4 on stealth checks for sure, 8 points. Shape Shadows provides Minor Illusion, that's worth 8, Invisibility at 3rd level, and yes, you can cast it on another creature, but no, you can't cast it with spell slots. It gets 10. Then Spells of the Mark. This is a very good standard list. Pass Without Trace, Greater Invisibility. I'm going to give this 23 points. So the base elf is 34, Cunning Intuition is 8, Shape Shadows is 18, and Spells of the Mark is 23, and the Mark of Shadow Elf totals 83 points. That's A tier, tied with the Tabaxi. And we're actually getting close to the end of the Dragon Marks. We have the Variant Half-Elf, Mark of Storm. So the base half-elf is 50 minus the enhanced ability scores and skill versatility, so it's worth 20. Then Windwright's Intuition, a D4 for Dexterity Acrobatics or Navigator's Tools. We'll say 3 points. Storm's Boon is resistance to lightning damage, that's worth 15. Then Headwinds, you know the Gust cantrip. Gust isn't very good, I'm going to give it 2 points. And then at 3rd level, you can cast Gust of Wind, which would be worth 20 if you could choose your casting ability score and cast again with spell slots. It's not, so I'm going to give it 10 for a total of 12 points. Spells of the Mark. This is a standard list, but there's some good stuff here. Levitate is good, Sleet Storm is good, Conjure Elementals is good. This gets 24 points. And we have the Half-Elf base for 20, Windwright's Intuition for 3, Storm's Boon 15, Headwinds 12, Spells of the Mark 24, and the Variant Half-Elf Mark of the Storm totals 74 points. That puts it at the bottom of A tier, tied with the Sea Elf. Dwarf Subrace, Mark of Warding. So the base Dwarf has a minus 10 for speed, and it's not minus 20 because of the heavy armor provision. Then they have Dark Vision for 10, Dwarven Resilience is 27, Dwarven Combat Training is 4, Tool Proficiency 1, and Stone Cutting 3, and that's a total of 35 points for the base Dwarf. Then we add Warder's Intuition, that's a D4 to Intelligence Investigation checks, or checks with Thieves' Tools. So this is, if you're a trap finder, this is your dream, 7 points. Wards and Seals provides Alarm and Mage Armor at level 1, or 6 and 8, And then at 3rd level, they also get Arcane Lock, which I think is an underappreciated spell, 12 points. And that's going to be a total of 26. And then Spells of the Mark. This is a standard list. It is also on the weaker side. There's some okay stuff here, like Armor of Agathis, and Knock comes in handy, and there's some tricks you can do with Glyph of Warding. I'm going to give it 18 points. So the base dwarf 35, Warder's Intuition 7, Wards and Seals 26, and Spells of the Mark 18, and the Mark of Warding dwarf totals 86 points. Yet another Dragonmarked race that would have scored A tier, tied with the Reborn. And that completes our trip to Eberron. Now let's travel to the past. Now, stuff that got errated, like the Changeling's original printing that allowed it to put both a +2 and +1 for ability scores into the same ability, I'm not covering that. Instead, this is legacy content. These racial options weren't errated, they were redesigned when they were released in Mordenkainen's Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. So if you don't use that book, you might still be using some versions of these races. And I'm not going to cover the whole list for 2 reasons. Number 1, there's a lot of them, and this would be a super long video. And number 2, because I already know what you want. You don't care where the legacy bugbear lands. It's going to be lower, of course. Who cares about lower? Then there's stuff that kind of changes, but not very much. The Shifter has 3 sub-races, but they end up being and excuse the pun, shifting around to the same features. The Changeling gets skills in a slightly different format, but it's basically the same. Here's what you want. You want me to rank the stuff that's going to be more powerful. I mean, be honest. You want the Satyr. I mean a bit. But you really want the Aarakocra, the Kobold, and the Yuan-Ti Pureblood. Are you not entertained? The Legacy Satyr. So base walking speed of 35 is worth 20 points. Ram is an unarmed strike for D4 using your head and horns, and it's worth 8 points. Then magic resistance, the big one. In the current rules, magic resistance operates against magic spells only. The Legacy Satyr doesn't use the current rules, so it has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. So what counts as an other magical effect? Well, according to sage advice, here's how you determine if something is considered magical. Number 1, if it's a magic item. Number 2, spells or the effects of spells. Number 3, uses a spell attack. Number 4, is fueled by spell slots. And number 5, is described as magical in its description. So here we have a Mind Flayer's Mind Blast, and we can see it's described as magical. It counts. A Beholder's Eye Rays are described as magical. They count. Interestingly, a Drow Matron Mother's Divine Flame doesn't count, at least by the criteria of this sage advice. It's almost like the interaction between new rules and obsolete rules isn't perfect. Weird. Still, if the current magic resistance is worth 35, then the legacy magic resistance is surely worth 55. Then Mirthful Leaps, I believe that was worth 5, it's unchanged, and Reveler is worth 9. So the legacy Satyr has speed 20, ram 8, magic resistance 55, Mirthful Leaps 5, and Reveler 8. That is a total of 96 points. And our what if legacy Satyr would have landed in S rank, at the bottom tied with the Astral Elf. That's 17 points higher than the up-to-date version, by the way. Legacy Aarakocra. So it has a base walking speed of 25 feet, which is kind of irrelevant because the Aarakocra is like never going to walk. It flies. Still, technically, that's minus 20 points. And honestly, it ain't gonna matter, because the flight is a flying speed of 50 feet. The current Aarakocra has a flying speed equal to their walking speed, which is 30 feet, and that's worth 100 points. And what do I do for each 5 feet of movement? That's right, I add 20 points. So here's where things get cray-cray. That will be an additional 80 points. This flight is worth 180 points. Now I'm going to take 10 off because things that enhance walking speed won't impact this flight speed. Still, that's going to be 170 points. Then Talons, 8 points. So minus 20 for the walking speed, 170 for flight, and 8 for Talons. and the Legacy Aarakocra breaks the broken as hell barrier with a total of 158 points. That's way, way, way at the top of S tier. 28 points over their current version. Are we having fun or what? The Legacy Kobold. So the Legacy Kobold only gets +2 for ability scores, that's minus 20 points. Then they have the standard Dark Vision, is worth 10. Grovel, Cower, and Beg is a ribbon feature. I've given it 8 points. And then we have Pack Tactics. I cannot overstate the value of advantage on attacks that is repeatable as this is, and so easy to set up. Any damage dealing character is afforded a benefit here like nothing else in the game, really. When I was originally asked about Pack Tactics on my Discord, I said it was at least as powerful as a free feat, but maybe more. And the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced it is more. I am going to give this 160 points. I mean, I gave the Aarakocra Flight 170. I think this is worth 160. Then Sunlight Sensitivity, and I already had that for the Drow, and it's minus 30 points. So ability scores minus 20, Dark Vision 10, Grovel, Cower, and Beg 8, Pack Tactics 160, Sunlight Sensitivity minus 30, and the Legacy Kobold totals 128 points. That would have tied them with the Shatter Kai in S tier. They also rate, get this, 63 points over their current version. Then we finish up our Legacy content with the original broken racial option in D&D, the Legacy Yuan-Ti Pureblood. Dark Vision is worth 10 points, innate spellcasting is a bit worse than the current version because no spell slots and it's automatically based on charisma. The current Yuan-Ti's is worth 27, this one I'm going to give 21. Then Magic Resistance is the same as the Satyr, and that's worth 55. And then Poison Immunity, and we had this with the Grung, and it was worth 50. And we have Dark Vision 10, Innate Spellcasting 21, Magic Resistance 55, Poison Immunity 50, and that is 136 points. The Legacy Yuan-Ti would have been at the top of S tier, but behind the Legacy Aarakocra. So there's where these racial options would have ranked if I had ranked them. This would also be a really messy tier chart, unlike the pristine one you're looking at now. In my next and final video in this series, I'm going to be covering the key learnings and biggest surprises of this whole exercise, and I hope you'll join me. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you to Airhead, Alex R, Vo, Bloody 9, Artherazone, CJ, Chris C, Clement Brunette, Coral, Dank Train, Dewey Cheatham and Howe, Douglas Reynolds, Eden the DM, Eric Wasserman, FBK05, Gishlife, Lightfoot, Heisenberger, Jay Gemmel, James Makla, James Sprague, Jean-Baptiste Blanchette, Jiriru, John Matera, Jonathan Zucker, Joseph Van Horn, Justin Times, Lars V, Mark D, Mark Sexton, Math Guy Dave, Mr. Brett, PCZ, Quicksilver HG80, Ramen Goblin, Scott Parsons, Sig, Tazel, Thunderlock, Vu, and William Whittles.